In the silent darkness of dawn, when the world rests between deep sleep and the first breath of morning, something seems to awaken. It is in this almost invisible interval of time that ancient mysteries draw near to human consciousness, as if wanting to be remembered. Edgar Cayce, the man known as the Sleeping Prophet, left messages that spanned decades, and one of them today echoes chillingly with what we are experiencing. It's not just about vague predictions or spiritual metaphors. It's about a clear, detailed, and frightening vision of a future that seemed distant but is now knocking at the door of our reality. You can try to ignore it, but there are times when the pieces fit together so precisely that it's impossible not to feel a shiver run down your spine. Imagine a simple man without extensive academic studies, lying in a deep trance, and suddenly describing with precision events that would only happen decades later. The rational mind struggles to explain it, but the recorded, dated, and witnessed accounts leave no room for easy doubt. Cayce spoke of drastic changes on Earth, of climate transformations, of pole shifts, and even of the awakening of a collective spiritual consciousness. At the time, many considered him just a mystical dreamer. But today, looking at the signs accumulating around us, the weight of his words gains another gravity. What once seemed distant now merges with the present, creating the feeling that the prophesied future has already begun to unfold before our eyes. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the scene he described. Oceans invading lands where entire cities once stood, fertile regions transforming into arid deserts, and the climate changing with an intensity never before witnessed. At that time, people laughed at the idea that the Earth could change so violently, so suddenly. But today one only needs to look at the news. Floods that sweep away entire communities, devastating droughts, increasingly stronger hurricanes, and temperatures breaking records every year. You don't need to believe in prophecies to realize that the planet is reacting, as if following a script written long ago. And in that script, Cayce warned us that these would be just the first signs, the warnings of something even greater. There is something disturbing in the precision with which he described the Earth's poles changing position, causing alterations in the planet's axis. For many scientists, this idea seemed impossible, but in recent years, studies confirm that the magnetic North Pole is indeed moving at an accelerated pace, shifting unpredictably towards Siberia. It's not a coincidence. It's exactly what Cayce had mentioned. He said that such changes would not only be physical but spiritual, that humanity would be placed before a gigantic mirror, forced to face its own responsibility for what happens in the world. Perhaps that's why so many feel an invisible weight on their shoulders today, a sense that something grand and uncontrollable is approaching. It's not just fear of natural disasters, but the intuition that we are living through a spiritual crossroads. Edgar Cayce spoke of the Earth as a living being, in constant transformation, and said that disasters would not be divine punishments, but consequences of man's disconnection from his essence and from the planet itself. It was as if he was trying to warn us that the greatest tragedy would not be in the water invading cities or the fire consuming entire forests, but in the forgetting of who we truly are. Now imagine yourself walking alone down a silent street in the early hours of the morning. The lights flicker, the wind blows strangely, and a sense of emptiness fills the air. This is the same emptiness Cayce said humanity would feel, the perception that, despite all the technology, wealth, and achievements, something essential has been lost. And this emptiness would be the sign that the time for choices has arrived. Either we heed the call to change, or we will be swept away by the tide of inevitable transformations. The most unsettling thing is that he didn't just speak of environmental catastrophes. Cayce also mentioned social and spiritual crises, moments when human values would be tested like never before. He saw times of division, of conflicts, of people distancing themselves from each other amidst fear and distrust. But at the same time, he spoke of the possibility of an unprecedented spiritual rebirth, as if the ashes of old humanity could give rise to something new, more conscious, closer to the divine essence. This duality, destruction and rebirth, is what makes his words so disturbing, because while they frighten, they also carry a deep hope. Cayce said that nothing would be definitive, that the future was not completely written, but that each person, each choice, could influence the course of events. Still, there was a certainty in his voice when he spoke of the great physical changes of the earth. This, he said, could not be avoided. What we could choose was how we would face the inevitable. As you hear these words, perhaps a memory comes to mind. Recent images of devastated cities, people seeking shelter, entire families trying to rebuild after losing everything. It's hard not to associate these scenes with what Cayce described, and it's even more unsettling to think that perhaps we are only at the beginning. The sleeping prophet spoke of waters advancing, of America's coastlines being transformed, of entire parts of the earth disappearing under the oceans. He said that the Atlantic and Pacific held secrets, and that their waters would swallow familiar lands. Words that to many sounded like delirium, but today, given the frightening rise in sea levels, no longer seem so distant. And there's more. Cayce also spoke of spiritual revelations that would come to light during this period of crisis. He said that the veils between worlds would become thinner, that spiritual contacts would become increasingly common, as if humanity needed constant reminders that it is not alone. Perhaps this is why so many people report inexplicable experiences, vivid dreams, feelings of invisible presences, or even encounters that defy logic. It's as if the invisible is trying to awaken us before it's too late. And as this reality unfolds, the echoing question is inevitable. Are we prepared to hear the call? Not the call of fear, but the call of transformation. Because, at its core, Cayce's prophecy was not just about destruction, but about a new beginning. He said that after the great changes, a new era would emerge, where humanity would finally remember its spiritual origin and live in greater harmony with the earth. But to reach that point, it would be necessary to cross the valley of uncertainty, where we are now. There's a strange feeling when we look back and realize that someone had already described the present we are now living. Edgar Cayce, in his deep trance states, spoke of a time when humanity would be confronted with harsh truths, as if the veil between the visible and the invisible were suddenly torn. And observing current days, it's impossible not to feel this veil becoming increasingly fragile. What once seemed like a distant prophecy now reveals itself in daily headlines, in worrying statistics, in looks of fear and despair, stamped on the faces of people who lost everything in a blink of an eye. It's as if we are inside a story he began to tell over a century ago, never imagining how precise it would be. Imagine a quiet beach where entire generations built their lives by the sea. Children played in the sand, families gathered at sunset, and every detail seemed eternal. But now the waves advance further each year, swallowing streets, houses, memories. It's the same scenario Cayce described, as if he had clearly seen the pain of what seemed impossible to lose. He warned that entire lands would disappear under the ocean and that the maps of the future would not be the same as those we know. Today, scientists confirm that some regions will no longer be habitable in the coming decades due to rising sea levels. It's not a coincidence. It's exactly the kind of transformation Cayce described with a calm voice, yet charged with gravity. But it wasn't just the physical planet that would change. He said that the human mind itself would be forced to expand, that spirituality would cease to be a distant topic and become a vital necessity. When material security crumbles, when solid ground ceases to exist, the spirit seeks another kind of foundation. Perhaps this is why so many people, even those who never showed interest in the invisible, are now drawn to spiritual experiences, seeking answers that science and logic cannot offer. External chaos awakens the internal call, and Cayce had already foreseen this awakening. In his most impactful readings, Cayce spoke of a profound shift in the Earth's axis, a movement that would change not only continents, but also collective consciousness. At the time, it seemed like an absurd idea, but now geological records themselves point to cycles where such changes have occurred in the remote past. He said that when this happened, it would be the sign that a new time was beginning, a period when humanity would be forced to choose between complete destruction or spiritual renewal. And it is precisely this choice that seems to hang over us now, silent yet urgent. Imagine yourself in any city, walking through busy streets, surrounded by sounds, lights and voices. Everything seems normal until suddenly a blackout takes over the space. The lights go out, the sounds cease, and the silence weighs almost unbearably. This is the kind of metaphor Cayce used to explain what was to come, an abrupt break with the false sense of stability, a call for everyone to look beyond what can be seen. He believed that amidst this blackout, many would find an inner light, a spark capable of guiding the way even in the darkest shadows. What is most impressive about his messages is that, despite all the gravity, he never spoke of condemnation. There was no tone of divine punishment, but rather of natural consequence. If a tree is cut excessively, the forest disappears. If the earth is wounded without rest, it responds. And if humanity distances itself from its essence, emptiness takes over. This was Cayce's simple logic, a reminder that we are not impotent spectators, but active participants in the unfolding destiny. Every choice, however small it may seem, creates ripples that propagate far beyond what we can see. And at this point, his words deeply touch something we all feel, albeit in silence, the sensation that we live in a time of revelation. Revelation not only of external events, but of what was hidden within us. How many times in recent times have you found yourself reflecting on the meaning of life, on what truly matters, on the fragility of everything that seemed so solid? This restlessness is not by chance. Cayce said that the great revelation would not only be in the collapse of the physical world, but in the collective awakening of a spiritual truth that had been dormant for centuries. He spoke of a new earth, not as a physical place to be discovered, but as a state of consciousness to be achieved. And for this birth to happen, the old world must collapse. It is painful, it is frightening, but it is also inevitable. Think of a butterfly. The cocoon must break, and in this process there is darkness, discomfort, and transformation. Humanity, Cayce said, is going through exactly this. We are in the middle of the cocoon, and the breaking, however painful, is the passage to something greater. At the same time, he spoke of spiritual signs that would accompany these changes: unexplained phenomena, intense dreams, strong intuitions, collective visions. Many already feel this. Dreams that seem more real than waking life, encounters with people who bring unexpected messages, coincidences so precise that they seem guided by something beyond chance. It's as if the invisible is whispering to us that we are not alone in this process, that greater forces accompany us even if we cannot see them. And it is at this point that his revelations become even more profound. Cayce said that at the moment of greatest darkness, the greatest light would also emerge, that amidst chaos and fear, a consciousness capable of uniting people in ways that once seemed impossible would blossom, that the pain would be great, but from it an unbreakable spiritual strength would be born. This is why, while his words frighten, they also comfort, because they speak not only of destruction, but of rebirth. If we look closely, we will see that this process has already begun. People around the world are uniting in search of new ways of living, of respecting the earth, of caring for each other, of seeking a spirituality that goes beyond divisions. It is not something that appears in the news, but something that pulses silently, like roots growing beneath the surface. And perhaps this is precisely what Cayce wanted us to understand, that even amidst advancing waters, consuming fire and crumbling structures, something greater is forming, invisible to the eyes, but impossible to stop. There is something profoundly unsettling in the way time seems to fold when we speak of Edgar Cayce's prophecies. It's as if his words weren't confined to the past, but echoed alive, spanning decades until they fit into the present with disturbing precision. When he described seas invading cities, fertile lands becoming barren, and humanity in spiritual crisis, he wasn't just painting a hypothetical future. He was in a way describing the life many are already witnessing today. And the most striking thing is that, amidst this gloomy scenario, he insisted that the true transformation would not only be physical, but internal, as if every catastrophe in the external world were a reflection of something deeper happening within us. Imagine yourself before an immense wall of water, advancing with relentless force. The instinct is to run, seek refuge, save what you can. But Cayce said that the most important race would not be against the force of the waters, but against spiritual forgetfulness. The greatest danger, according to him, was not in the destruction of cities or the changing of maps, but in the loss of connection with what gives meaning to existence. And if we look around, we realize how common this disconnection has become. Families separated by conflicts, societies divided by fear, people consumed by haste and the illusion of control. It's as if the whole world has been distracted while the silent tide approaches. Cayce spoke of a time when men would seek security in wealth, in technologies, in borders, but would discover painfully that none of this would be enough to protect them from the greater forces that govern life. He described a kind of collapse of human certainties, a moment when even the most skeptical would be forced to look beyond matter. And perhaps this is exactly what we are beginning to experience. The perception that everything that seemed solid can fall apart in an instant, and that only what cannot be seen or touched remains standing. It is interesting to note that, amidst his predictions, Cayce also spoke of the arrival of new spiritual knowledge. He said that previously hidden truths would be revealed, that man would have access to records older than known history itself, as if the past would come to light to illuminate the future. Many believe he was referring to the discovery of lost records of ancient civilizations, perhaps even of the mythical Atlantis, whose memories he mentioned in several of his readings. He said that Atlantis had fallen precisely because its great wisdom was used irresponsibly, and that current humanity ran the same risk. This parallel is unsettling because it leads us to reflect on whether we are not repeating ancient mistakes, surrounded by technological advancements, without the spiritual maturity necessary to use them. Imagine for a moment that all the answers to current dilemmas already exist, stored somewhere invisible, just waiting for humanity to be ready to receive them. Cayce believed that this would happen during this period of great changes, that hidden records, spiritual knowledge, and even collective memories would return to guide humanity in its transition. And perhaps this is why so many people today report intense intuitive experiences, as if something within them is awakening and bringing memories that do not seem to belong to this life. But along with this promise of revelation, Cayce also left severe warnings. He said that it would not be enough to wait for truths to emerge. It would be necessary to transform the way we live, the way we treat each other and the planet. Otherwise, the revelations would be in vain, and humanity could repeat the fall of ancient civilizations. This is perhaps the most frightening part of his messages. The idea that we are not just on the brink of a natural disaster, but facing a spiritual choice that will define the course of our existence. Think of how many times you've felt that the modern world moves too fast, as if we are always running, but without knowing where to go. This feeling of collective emptiness is what Cayce described as the greatest symptom of the time of change. He said that human beings would get lost in distractions until they were forced to face the inner silence, that space where no technology can enter, where only the soul can speak. And perhaps it is precisely in this silence that the key to surviving what is to come resides. Another of his impressive revelations spoke about the union between science and spirituality. He said that a time would come when both would cease to be enemies and would complement each other, revealing secrets of the universe that today seem unattainable. The interesting thing is that in recent years, science itself has begun to touch on fields that were once considered purely spiritual. Studies on consciousness, on near-death experiences, on the energetic nature of reality. It's as if the boundary between the visible and the invisible is beginning to dissolve, once again confirming what Cayce already anticipated. Now imagine yourself on a silent night, looking up at the starry sky. Suddenly, you realize that despite the vastness of the universe, there is something within you that echoes the same grandeur. This was the central point of Cayce's messages, to remind humanity that every human being carries a divine spark within, and that recognizing this truth would be the only way to navigate the storms of the future. He said that without this remembrance, all external achievements would be useless. But with it, even the greatest challenges could be overcome. There is also something deeply symbolic in the way he spoke of a new Earth. For Cayce, it was not just about the transforming planet, but about a renewed humanity. He described communities that would live in harmony, people united not by selfish interests, but by a greater consciousness of fraternity. He spoke of a time when divisions would cease to make sense, and when spirituality would no longer be a topic restricted to religions, but a living experience shared by all. It was this vision that balanced the weight of his darker prophecies, the promise that after darkness light would come, and if you stop to think, you will realize that there are already signs of this transformation. Amidst the chaos, people and groups emerge who seek new ways of living, who practice solidarity, who dedicate themselves to causes greater than themselves. These are silent seeds of a different future, perhaps exactly as Cayce described, because, in the end, his message was never just about destruction, but about the opportunity for a spiritual rebirth that could change everything. And here arises the inevitable question: are we ready for this change? Not just as humanity, but each one in their life, in their daily choices, in their way of seeing others and themselves. Cayce said that preparation would not be in food stockpiles or underground shelters, but in strengthening the soul. That true refuge would be in living in harmony with the highest values, in cultivating compassion, in seeking inner truth. This was the only way to traverse the times to come. There is an inevitable silence that settles in when we think about Edgar Cayce's words. It's as if the air becomes denser, as if the very atmosphere carries the weight of a revelation that can no longer be ignored. Throughout his life, the sleeping prophet insisted on a point that resonates to this day. The changes that would come would not just be external catastrophes, but internal transformations, destined to awaken humanity from a deep sleep. And now, as we observe the world, we clearly see that this awakening has begun, albeit painfully and turbulently. Imagine yourself in a modern city, surrounded by skyscrapers, lights, and incessant noises. Everything seems solid, permanent, but suddenly a tremor runs through the ground, glass shatters, structures sway, and the feeling of security dissolves in seconds. Cayce said that this was the perfect symbol for our time. We believe in an illusory solidity, but at any moment it can crumble, reminding us that nothing material is eternal. And when this illusion breaks, only the essential question remains: what truly endures? He said that humanity would undergo collective trials that would serve as mirrors. They would not be punishments, but reflections of accumulated choices. Uncontrolled climate would reflect our disconnection from nature. Social conflicts would reveal the lack of compassion among us. Diseases and health crises would show the internal imbalance of our own lives. Everything would be interconnected, as if the external world were just a projection of the inner world. This vision, though disturbing, also brought a powerful key. If the external reflects the internal, then by changing within oneself, each human being can influence the reality around them. There are reports that in trance Cayce mentioned not only disasters, but also the opening of spiritual portals. He said that amidst the chaos, many would begin to perceive invisible presences, to feel the proximity of deceased loved ones, to receive messages in dreams that seemed more real than the day itself. This would be the invisible's way of reminding us that we are never alone, that death is not the end, and that greater forces accompany our journey. How many people today report exactly this? Vivid dreams of departed family members, powerful intuitions that change decisions, encounters that seem guided by something beyond chance. These are signs that the prophecy is in progress, but also that we are not walking in absolute darkness. Cayce spoke of a time of revelation, and this word carries special weight. To reveal means to remove the veil, to show what was hidden. Perhaps this is why so many hidden truths are beginning to emerge. Mysteries of science, secrets of history, discoveries about the universe, and above all, revelations about who we truly are. It's as if the whole world is being forced to look at what it tried to ignore for centuries. And in this process there is pain, but there is also liberation. Imagine standing before a mirror that not only reflects your image, but your deepest essence. Every fear, every weakness, every shadow, but also every potential, every strength, every light. This is the mirror Cayce said humanity would face. A moment of truth so intense that no one could escape themselves anymore. And in this confrontation, there would be two choices: deny and get lost in chaos, or accept and be reborn stronger. What makes his words even more impressive is that despite all their weight, there was an unbreakable hope within them. He spoke of a new era that would emerge after the chaos, a time when humanity would live closer to the divine essence, in harmony with the earth and with itself. It was a promise that balanced the fear of destruction with the beauty of renewal. Like a dark night that, no matter how long it seems, always ends with the sunrise. Today we see signs of this dawn in small gestures, people uniting in solidarity during crises, communities seeking new ways of living in balance with nature, individuals awakening to a deeper and more authentic spirituality. These are fragile, but already present, seeds of a different future, perhaps exactly as Cayce described. Because in the end, his message was never just about destruction, but about the opportunity for a spiritual rebirth that could change everything. And here arises the inevitable question, are we ready for this change? Not just as humanity, but each one in their life, in their daily choices, in their way of seeing others and themselves. Cayce said that preparation would not be in food supplies or underground shelters, but in strengthening the soul. That true refuge would be in living in tune with the highest values, in cultivating compassion, in seeking inner truth. This was the only way to traverse the times to come. There is something inevitable in the silence that settles when we think of Edgar Cayce's words. It's as if the air thickens, as if the very atmosphere carries the weight of a revelation that can no longer be ignored. Throughout his life, the sleeping prophet insisted on a point that resonates to this day. The changes to come would not just be external catastrophes, but internal transformations meant to awaken humanity from a deep sleep. And now, as we observe the world, we clearly see that this awakening has begun, albeit painfully and turbulently. Imagine yourself in a modern city, surrounded by skyscrapers, lights, and incessant noise. Everything seems solid, permanent. But suddenly a tremor runs through the ground, glass shatters, structures sway, and the feeling of security dissolves in seconds. Cayce said that this was the perfect symbol for our time. We believe in an illusory solidity, but at any moment it can collapse, reminding us that no material thing is eternal. And when this illusion breaks, only the essential question remains: what truly endures? He said that humanity would undergo collective trials that would serve as mirrors. They would not be punishments, but reflections of accumulated choices. Uncontrolled climate would reflect our disconnection from nature. Social conflicts would reveal the lack of compassion among us. Diseases and health crises would show the internal imbalance of our own lives. Everything would be interconnected, as if the external world were merely a projection of the inner world. This vision, though disturbing, also provided a powerful key. If the external reflects the internal, then by changing within, each human being can influence the reality around them. There are accounts that in trance Cayce mentioned not only disasters, but also the opening of spiritual portals. He said that amidst the chaos, many would begin to perceive invisible presences, to feel the closeness of deceased loved ones, to receive messages in dreams that seemed more real than the waking day itself. This would be the invisible's way of reminding us that we are never alone, that death is not the end, and that greater forces accompany our journey. How many people today report exactly this? Vivid dreams of family members who have passed on, powerful intuitions that change decisions, encounters that seem guided by something beyond chance. These are signs that the prophecy is unfolding, but also that we are not walking in absolute darkness. Cayce spoke of a time of revelation, and that word carries a special weight. To reveal means to remove the veil, to show what was hidden. Perhaps this is why so many hidden truths are starting to emerge. Mysteries of science, secrets of history, discoveries about the universe, and, above all, revelations about who we truly are. It's as if the entire world is being forced to look at what it tried to ignore for centuries. And in this process there is pain, but there is also liberation. Imagine standing before a mirror that not only reflects your image, but your deepest essence. Every fear, every weakness, every shadow, but also every potential, every strength, every light. This is the mirror Cayce said humanity would face. A moment of truth so intense that no one could escape themselves anymore. And in this confrontation, there would be two choices: deny and get lost in chaos, or accept and be reborn stronger. What makes his words even more impressive is that despite all their weight, there was an unbreakable hope within them. He spoke of a new era that would emerge after the chaos, a time when humanity would live closer to the divine essence, in harmony with the earth and with itself. It was a promise that balanced the fear of destruction with the beauty of renewal, like a dark night that, no matter how long it seems, always ends with the sunrise. Today we see signs of this dawn in small gestures. People uniting in solidarity during crises, communities seeking new ways of living in balance with nature, individuals awakening to a deeper and more authentic spirituality. These are seeds of the new era, still fragile but already present. And perhaps this is the true meaning of Cayce's prophecies, not just to warn about what was to come, but to prepare the human heart to recognize hope even amidst the storm. He said that when the world seemed to be falling apart, that would be the exact moment when new possibilities would arise, that the greatest light would reveal itself precisely in the greatest darkness. This is a message that resonates deeply in times of uncertainty, because it is not just about predicting catastrophes, but about remembering that in any situation there is always an inner choice: to succumb to fear or to awaken to something greater. Imagine a small flame in the midst of a cold night. The wind blows, the darkness is overwhelming, but that flame continues to burn. Cayce believed that every human being carries this flame within, and that it is indestructible. No matter how strong the storm, this divine spark never goes out. From it will come the strength to endure what is to come. And reflecting on his words, an inevitable question arises that transcends time. Are you ready for this transformation? Are you willing to look within, to face your own shadows, to awaken your own light? Because in the end, the prophecy speaks not only of humanity in general, but of each one of us. Each person is an essential part of this process, and each individual choice contributes to the collective future. Edgar Cayce didn't just leave warnings, he left a call, an invitation for us, amidst the chaos, to choose to remember who we truly are, so that we do not get lost in the illusions of the world, but find refuge in what is eternal. And perhaps this is exactly what we need to hear today, that no matter how frightening the present and how uncertain the future, there is something within us that is greater than any storm. And so, the cycle is complete. The words of the sleeping prophet continue to echo, reminding us that the future is not written in stone but in our hearts. That every act of compassion, every search for truth, every step towards the light contributes to the birth of the new era he described. And that, even when everything seems to crumble, there is always the promise of a rebirth.